Travis, it's almost Christmas. It's almost Christmas.
Wearing a very Christmassy sweater.
Looks good, and I got a red
short shirt. You Californians don't celebrate
absolutely.
Christmas.
Yeah. I went surfing this afternoon. I'm in my bare feet.
Well, color me jealous.
You know, I used to get the holidays. Christmas used to be the saddest time for me. For whatever reason, I always felt sorry for the people that didn't have family or money more than I enjoyed the season. And it was always kind of a downer for me. I would always look forward. New Year's was a lot of fun. I'd do that. I enjoyed that. But the last few years, I think I'm finally figuring it out. Being with my wife, she's been a really good influence on me, and we've had a lot of fun during the holidays. And so I think I'm finally finding a way to see it, and be able to enjoy it, but not lose my compassion for other people who don't have as much. Yeah.
Well, that's good, man. I'm glad to see you're in that space. I saw a funny joke, a meme.
Yeah.
I posted it on. I shared it. Somebody else had posted it, but it's a little child going up to Santa, and the child says, "Homoousios or homoiousios," and Santa goes, "What?" And the child says, "You're not the real Santa." I'll let the listeners try to figure out what the joke was.
Get your Latin dictionary out.
Greek.
Oh, I screwed it up.
Lucia. Yeah, not substantia. Yeah.
Okay. So last time we were talking about Thomas Aquinas and this book that I've been reading by Norm Geisler. And as soon as we started talking about Aquinas, we talked about a reference in it to Van Til, and we never got back to Aquinas. And so I'll make the statement that I think I agree with Van Til, this idea of a self-affirming argument that the Bible gives us is an amazing argument. It's really an interesting argument. I just think that other arguments are also compelling. Arguments for the fine-tuning arguments, arguments for God's existence, historical arguments of who Jesus claims to be, and the resurrection. It just seems to me we have a whole smorgasbord of good arguments that one shouldn't exclude the other. What do you think of that?
I think I'm giving my outfit. I'm thinking about getting a pipe. I had a crush on a girl long ago. She didn't reciprocate, but for Christmas she gave me a pipe.
Wow. Did you smoke it?
I was this pretentious 17-year-old kid sitting in my dorm room at boarding school smoking a pipe. I think I still got the pipe.
Cool.
But back to your point.
What's that got to do with Van Til? Did Van Til have a pipe?
No, but Presbyterians are real serious about their pipes and their cigars.
Oh, okay.
I don't think Van Til smoked. But John Murray did. And he was a colleague of Van Til's. But more importantly, most presbys have smoked pipes. But anyway, going back to Van Til. Do you believe that Van Til's argument vindicates the biblical claim to inspiration?
I don't think I ever made that connection, but I think if his argument is sound, and I think it is, then it would be another way to test the truth of the Bible. If you have this book that's been written by, dozens of people over thousands of years, and it hangs together in such a way that it's actually self-affirming, then that's pretty remarkable, and it speaks to it's evidence for the idea that it's divinely divinely inspired. So sure.
I understand. Okay, that's fair. What about the Trinity? Do you think that there's a transcendental argument to be had for the Trinity? Not indirectly in the sense that it vindicates the Bible, which itself teaches the Trinity, but that the idea that God is Trinity is a precondition of thinking.
I think once you have it, you can come up with the argument, but I don't think you could work it out beforehand.
That's an interesting point because, the Apostle John says that in the beginning was the Word. The Greek word logos there has a long history to it in philosophy. The ancients in Greece, going back to Heraclitus and even further back into the history of philosophy, and even Oriental philosophers would appeal to the Tao, which had the same kind of concept. There was this idea that there's a logic or a pure reason that we tap into that allows us to know things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a biblical idea. And if you think that your mind is chaos, then you have no accounting of your ability to reason.
That's right. We wouldn't even think about reasoning. It wouldn't even be an idea.
Right. So why trust a brain that's the product of chance? So yeah, all of those considerations I think are valid. I personally don't think you can get to the Trinity through the argument. I think that what it shows is that the argument shows that all non-theistic worldviews are self-defeating in some sense. And so you can run a kind of retorsive, transcendental type argument through these different schools of thought and show that they are self-defeating or insufficient as worldviews. And what that gives you is theism, but I don't think it gives you the Bible. And so what you have to now do is enter into the theistic worldview and assess evidence with that presupposition that God does exist. And now the question is, which expression of Abrahamic theism is true? Is it Judaism? Is it Christianity? Is it Islam? Or maybe some variation of those? And then you're now dealing with probabilistic type arguments, which Van Tillians don't like. They don't like to rest the case for Christianity on probabilities.
Right.
So as a good Thomist, I'm going to say the case for God gives you certainty that God exists. But the case for Christianity, there's some room for it's possibly false.
Does Van Til, this is kind of a side note, but it's on that line. Does Van Til ever address the idea of solipsism, the idea that we can't even be 100% certain that, I'm the only person alive and the whole universe is just in my head, or there's some, horrible ruler out there that has put together this whole world so that I see it and I think it's real and you don't really exist. I mean, isn't fundamentally in the universe there's always some wiggle room and some doubt? Does he ever address that?
No, I don't think he does directly, but he does argue that he who rejects Christianity is reduced to absurdity. And we know that solipsism is just one of those views. So he may, I'd have to look it up, but I wouldn't be surprised if I found a lecture of Van Til or found something in his writings where he alludes to the idea that, if you reject Christianity, solipsism is on the table as a possibility. And it is, because you're basically saying I'm abandoning all reason. And there are, ancient Greek philosophers, one in particular said, thought is meaningless. And so he stopped speaking. But then the question is, well, how do you communicate? So he would wiggle his finger.
Right. And he had to think to come up with that statement.
He had to think to come up with that statement, and communication was still a necessity for him.
Right.
So yeah, you have things like that, and that doesn't I think Van Til would see that as confirmation of the idea that he who rejects God's revelation is reduced to absurdity. Incidentally, I think that that's true. I just am approaching it a little bit differently.
Okay. What would Van Til think if you were Van Til and I said, is it fair to ask, is the proof in the pudding? How many people come to know Christ and the Christian faith through the Van Til argument, and how many people come to Christ through more traditional arguments? It's almost like he's saying you may come to Christ through a traditional argument, but then you came to Christ wrongly, or do people get saved hearing Van Til's argument?
Yeah, and this is one of the perennial problems with apologetics. Do you remember when we first started the show that we had Jeff Zwierenk on?
Yeah,
but we had him on only after we did a series on the Kalam cosmological argument. Those were some of our first shows.
Yeah,
and I remember the comments. We don't have as many comments as we used to, but one of the comments on our show was just people mocking us for saying, we have arguments for God's existence. And a lot of people will say, well, I never needed an argument for God's existence to come to believe in God. And so you also have the issue of, you'll have a lot of people, they'll be persuaded that Christianity is true. They'll embrace Christ. And then later they may not think that the arguments that brought them to the faith are all that good.
Yeah.
And some people have said, well, that's just proof that apologetics is not even really a thing. It's just a group of people who've already come to their conclusion that are rationalizing their decision. So this is rationalizing. It's not rationality.
But atheist apologetics is a real thing. I mean, for them, sure. It's like they have arguments against God, and if their argument is true, then we could argue, well, your arguments are the same way. You're just rationalizing what you want to believe.
Yeah, to the degree, and I'm sure there are many Christians out there that rationalize all of their views. To the degree that happens, I would say the same amount, if not more, is going on in atheistic circles. I was just telling you, I was talking to a physicist before the show, and we were talking about the Kalam argument, and he was walking me through the multiple attempts to give us a universe that didn't have a beginning. And they're crazy. I mean, they are absurd. But the smugness with which atheists articulate these views, apparently oblivious to the fact that there really is not a shred of physical evidence for those views, is breathtaking. It's like, how do you bring together the confidence with which you're making the assertion with the lack of evidence for the assertion? It's right. Always, is this performative? What's going on here? Kind of like some preachers who don't know anything, will posture this great confidence in the face of arguments against their view when they're actually getting destroyed in the argument. And so Christians need to do their homework and stop being accused of this. They need to think about these things as we engage the culture. But going back to your point, I certainly don't want to think that my salvation is only as good as my apologetical arguments.
No, and that's true. But they made a big difference in my faith, and
yeah, I think you and I are both uncool.
Oh, total nerds. Yeah.
We all know that you're not cool, but I'm just saying that your testimony, you and I have the uncool testimonies. I grew up in the church. Didn't you grow up in the church?
Yes, I did.
And so, we weren't heroin addicts before we found Jesus,
Right.
Which there are Christians out there that mourn that fact. Boy, I wish I was a heroin addict so I can get up there and give a cool testimony.
That's right.
I don't have that testimony to give or anything like it. I grew up in the church, and I did go through periods of doubt, but it's not like I was an atheist who studied apologetical arguments and was convinced. My testimony is nothing like Hugh Ross's, nothing.
Is there such a thing as a cradle evangelical?
Well, yeah, I mean, the presbys, if they believe, if you believe in infant baptism, you can call yourself a cradle presby, which there's an evangelical wing of the Presbyterian Church. So
yeah,
I think that's. I grew up in the Methodist Church, so I guess you could say I was a cradle Methodist. I was baptized and all of that stuff. But it's because of that people will look at me and they'll say, well, you grew up believing this stuff, and so these arguments are not all that important for you because you'd believe anyway. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I've always been aware of the fact that I grew up as a Christian, and the easiest and laziest thing I can do is to continue to be a Christian, because then I don't have to really question it. And so, but because of that, I went out of my way to question it, because I realized my own tendency to just want to be right. And so I feel like I've really looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to believe that about myself, but the great thing about a good argument is that I say to my students whenever a student says something like that to me, I'll say, you know what, make my motives as saintly or sinister as you please.
That's right.
Here's the argument.
What's your evidence? That's right.
What do you do with this argument? Because I mean, I can't convince you of my psychological purity. I can't convince you that I came with untrammeled desires just to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And through, sheer philosophical effort and sound reasoning, I arrived at the truth. And that's the only reason I was persuaded. How in the world could I prove that to you? I doubt that idea myself. I'm sure my biases, being what they are, made me lean in favor of theism. I try to avoid that. I try to be as open and honest with the evidence as I can. I don't want to accept an argument for God's existence that is unsound. I certainly would not want to foist that on someone. If I had any doubt myself that it was not that good of an argument. But that's what makes presenting the evidence so good. We can just forego all that and just let's argue the points.
That's exactly it. Because there's always going to be Christians the people who grow up Christians and question it and go away from their faith. And then there's going to be Christians who question it and stay in their faith. And there's going to be people who were raised as atheists and question it and stay atheists or come to be Christians. There's every combination of possibilities. So what? So it's like you say, what's the argument and what's your evidence for it? And as best you can, try to work that through.
Right. And the problem with that is it takes time, it takes thought.
And it takes humility, Travis, humility. It's really, that's the hardest part for everybody, for me.
Yeah. And it's hard thinking is just that. It's tough. I mean, it's not easy to wade through literature and, okay, this guy says this guy says this. You're going back and forth. It's very difficult. And, some people just don't want to do that. I will say this is when Craig's idea, and he's not unique, but Craig's idea of the idea of God being a properly basic belief, and he gets this from Plantinga, but Craig would tell you, I mean, it's not the only source for this. This the idea that it's perfectly rational to believe in God wholly apart from formal lines of evidence or arguments.
Yes.
So even if I had nothing like that, would it still be rational for me to believe in God? Would it even be rational to think that my belief in God constitutes knowledge. And Craig pushes for the idea of the internal witness of the Holy Spirit. And this may be I've said some of these things before, but this may be one of the most important things I can say, is that if that doctrine is true and that the Spirit, through the Spirit's witness, my primary means of knowing God is that witness itself. And if the gospel is objectively self-attesting, which I would suggest that it is, meaning that just hearing it, you can know. I'm not saying you do know. I'm saying you can know that it's true just by hearing it and not, say, researching evidence for the resurrection or something like that.
Right.
Now, if that's true, then we actually have, first of all, a more sure way of knowing that Christianity is true, because now that's the Spirit's witness and not my apologetical argument. And second of all, I have actually a stronger basis for being open-minded and objective when it comes to those arguments. Now, if you listen to Robert Price's debate with William Lane Craig on the resurrection, Price just goes after Craig and just really lambasts him for believing in this doctrine and basically saying that the evidence doesn't matter. Now, I think Craig answered him well, but there's this fear out there that says, well, if you believe in the internal witness of the Spirit and you believe that you can know God wholly apart from arguments, then basically you're just finding what you're looking for. In other words, you're in some sense dishonest as you're assessing these arguments.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And we have to take that argument really, really seriously.
We do. And Craig has said this, and I think this is a really good point. And when he said this, it really revolutionized my whole thought about all of this. He said, if you think about it, if you become a theological rationalist and you think that the only way I can know God is because I have this argument for God, isn't that planting the seed for dishonesty? Let's say you have a very convicted theist, somebody who really believes in God, but then realizes, oh no, if I don't have these arguments, then I can't say I know God. Well, then by hook or by crook, you're going to accept whatever argument comes your way.
Yeah, and I think for me, it really bears on as I get older and I feel like I know the Lord better. All of those rational arguments have brought me to the doorstep. But knowing God, wow, what does that mean? It means like a friend, like a person,
it's a personal relationship with God.
It really is. I mean, you try to avoid that cliche, but it's a personal relationship.
Sure.
And when you start hearing his voice and you start realizing he's really there and he really loves me, and when I pray and I read the Bible, he's really witnessing to me. I'm not thinking about the Kalam argument or the fine-tuning arguments. They got me there. They got me to the doorstep, but I had to open the door and go into that most frightening, joyful place, which is his presence. And that's where the certainty comes. To me, the certainty came in an intellectual way when I hear, Gary Habermas's argument for the resurrection, for example, or Hugh Ross's fine-tuning argument. But I don't care if it doesn't change my heart. I don't care if it doesn't touch me. I don't care if it doesn't put me on a path towards holiness, towards becoming more Christ-like. That's the point of it. Otherwise it's just like any other, you give me this new argument for how the sun burns energy. Okay, great. So what? So let's say you're completely right. Well, what difference does it make?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so when he said that, and he said, look, if you abandon the internal witness and you become a theological rationalist and you say that the only way I can know God is through these arguments, that is the seed for intellectual dishonesty. But if I have the internal witness of the Spirit, I now can approach these arguments with an open mind. In fact, here's an option.
Yeah.
For me on the table. Here's an option. None of the arguments are sound. None of the arguments are all that good. And as a Christian, I can be open-minded about that and say, yeah, I guess there just is no apologetic to be had. And I will just attend church and try to grow in Christ and witness when I can. But I have no apologetical argument to give. And I can still be a Christian even without that. And that's a very freeing thing, because you don't have to read the latest science journal to make sure the universe still had a beginning, in order for you to say, I know God. And B, it totally allows me to have this open mind so that when I do say, oh, this is a very good argument, I can present it with the utmost sincerity and honesty, because no one had to, by hook or by crook, manipulate me into accepting it. I studied this argument. I think it's really good.
It gives you, you're right. It gives you the emotional freedom to really honestly look at it and not be afraid that it might be true.
Not be afraid that it might, and also not be afraid that it might be unsound.
Yes.
That it may be an argument that's just a bad. I think that the fine-tuning argument, and you and I both agree with this, it's a freaking awesome argument.
I think it's impenetrable. Yeah.
But yeah, I do too. But let's just say hypothetically that you and I just read an article tomorrow. An article comes out, and in 10 pages, whoever this person is just dismantles it and shows that it's just stupid. And you and I get on this show next week, and how can we be so stupid as to listen to Hugh Ross and William Lane Craig and those guys? I mean, that's just crazy. This is a bad argument, you and I can do that. I mean, in other words, I've not sacrificed the knowledge of God if I do that. And so I don't know why the atheist community hates Craig for teaching this doctrine, but it's a very important doctrine to him. And I think it's an important doctrine to us. And Aquinas, going back to him, said, look, in order to make sure that the knowledge of God was available to all, God made the way of faith so that Sophie the washwoman and Sophia the philosopher and everybody in between can come to know God, even if there are no apologetical arguments around.
Yes. And you can argue this in the other direction. Let's say you're God, right?
Yeah.
And nothing exists yet. And you think, well, I'm going to create this universe, and there's going to be people in it that are really smart and other people that aren't so smart and people that are really sensitive in other areas. So I need to tune this message in such a way that anybody can hear it.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And that's what we're claiming is there. So
I had the privilege, and I've said this multiple times, of leading my son to Christ. And he was 4. He was 4 years old. And here's what I did not say. I did not say, son, now before you hear the gospel, I need to introduce you to the ontological argument for God's existence.
Yeah.
Because until you hear that argument, you're not going to know God. No. My son at 4 knew that he had done some bad things. He knew that he needed a savior. And he believed in Jesus.
Wow.
And I did not in any way, shape, or form think, well, my boy knows God, but I really know him because I have all these arguments. No.
How many people have you and I met who are like the happiest person alive?
Yeah.
And they know Christ without a doubt. and yet maybe they're not the smartest people, and yet their confidence in Christ is unshakable. They may have never heard an apologetic argument in their life, or maybe they even did, and they think they're all pointless.
Yeah.
And they know the Lord better than you and I do. So, that's...
Yeah, John Gerstner used to tell this joke. The apologist stood up and gave his case for Christianity, and a layperson came up to him and said, I didn't doubt Christianity until I heard you make a case for
it. Yeah, that's good.
And apologists, as a lot of these guys on YouTube are doing this. I mean, they are like it's a very dangerous thing. They think they have this great argument, but they don't know how to wield it. And so what apologists should be doing more than anything is attending to the witness of the Spirit in the hearts, reading scripture, prayer, going to church activities, taking in the sacraments. All of those things
That's right.
are the most important thing that you can do to grow in your assurance. Because my apologetical arguments, and this is one of the reasons why I am classical and not full presuppositionalist. The reason I am is because I don't think that the apologetical arguments were ever meant to give you the full assurance. I think Christ, to save us from arrogance and all other things, I think Christ wanted the arguments to fall a little bit short, so that you really, A, had to take that step of faith. You had to trust him. And B, your assurance has to come in the context of not you reading books in a library.
That's right.
I wish more Christians would go to libraries and read books. But it would come from you fellowshipping with him and the saints in your church.
We're out of time, but I got to say this. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is "Speak the truth in love."
Yeah.
Like the hardest 5 words in the Bible. It's really an instruction manual, Travis. We're supposed to speak truthful things.
Yeah.
How do we do it? With love. If we don't do it with love, it's not even the same kind of truth. It's deficient. It's almost defective. It's incomplete.
Yeah.
Truth with love is a different thing than just truth.
That's right. I could follow up, but we have to go.
And we stink, Travis. We keep talking about how does Van Til connect to Aquinas, and we still haven't done it. So next week.
That's what we got to do next week.
All right, brother.
Mission not accomplished.